Okay, so welcome everyone to the Learning Objectives program today, which is on Google My Business. And our guest presenter is Gyi Tsakalakis. Gyi is with AttorneySync, which is a law firm internet marketing company in Chicago. And I have asked Gyi here today to help us out because he is one of the smartest people I know. So,
Ah,
Gyi, I'm going to let you take it away.
well, that's a very kind introduction, and I appreciate that. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. As Catherine mentioned, we will have some time to take questions, but please feel free to enter questions in the chat as we go along. I'll try to balance this with some basics, intermediate, and some more advanced Google My Business information. And so, yep, we're talking Google My Business. I'm Gyi. I was a trial attorney. I founded AttorneySync. Here's some more stuff about me. We have some podcasts, lunch hour legal marketing, clienting. I'm a co-chair of the ABA's client development committee, and I do some advising to legal tech. So I'm fully immersed at the intersection of law practice and technology. And if you have additional questions, you can find me at Twitter or at my website. So I'm going to do some live demonstrations today as opposed to slides. And so as we talk about Google My Business, let's start with who cares? Why do we care about Google My Business at all? And the answer is that Google My Business is likely to be the instance of first impression for anybody that looks you up online. So whether they get referred to you, a friend refers them, a family member refers them, a colleague refers them to you, they're going to likely look you up online. So here's a Google search engine result page for my friend Steve Gersten, who's an attorney in Michigan. And this big box on the right that has a picture of Steve and his name and reviews and his address and his appointments, that's generated by Google My Business. And so you can see that takes up a lot of real estate on a search engine result page. And so this is a important component to your web marketing strategy for visibility for searches on your name and a variety of other searches that we'll talk about. Here's an example for Levinson and Stephanie. It's a firm here in Chicago. Again, search on the firm's name, this big box on the right. All of that information is generated from the firm's Google My Business listing. There's an attorney at the firm. So again, another example, a lot of real estate for searches on the firm name. So the point here that I try to make with people is people say, well, my clients, I don't really rely on the internet. What I'm trying to impress upon you is that even if it's not the unbranded search, it's not the category search like personal injury lawyer, criminal defense lawyer, DUI lawyer, searches on your name and your firm name, which we would call brand search, um, those searches, the instance of first impression is likely going to be the Google My Business listing in one form or another. Just some quick other examples of Google My Business. This is what we would call an unbranded search for personal injury lawyer in Raleigh. And so this whole box with the map here and these little local pack listings, which we'll talk more about, that's also Google My Business. Again, a lot of real estate. If you have your phone with you, you pop open a search on your phone and you'll see if you do one of these types of searches or search on a lawyer's name or some kind of legal search, it commands like the whole screen on your phone because there's just not that much room. And so, right, you got ads to start, but after the ads, you've got usually for these types of searches, you've got these local pack listings. Here's another example of some searches in for lawyers that show up prominently for those types of searches in North Carolina. So I try to give you a local example. And so as you look at these results and you ask yourself, if you're searching on your own name or your firm name, are you generating a one box? Are you seeing this information? Sometimes we'll see lawyers that the pictures the images that they use or the reviews or there's missing information, that kind of stuff plays some role in the mind of your next client because they're thinking, either the lawyer's just not on the ball with what's going on online, or if it's a negative review, obviously that becomes an online reputation kind of liability issue. Or there might be images or videos that don't best reflect your firm. And so that's what we want to talk about today is how to use Google My Business to really put your best foot forward for these types of searches. So here's an example for an attorney that there's no one box. And so again, you're not getting the same kind of rich information, making it easier for your potential clients to find that information about you online. And just one more final example, and we'll get into the meat and potatoes. But this is if you're a multi-location. So one of the questions that always comes up is, what can you actually have in terms of listings? And per Google's guidelines, you get a listing for every physical office location, and you also get one for every practitioner. So you can't create listings for every different practice area that your firm does, but for physical office locations and practitioners, being the actual lawyers at your firm, you can have a listing for each of those. And so there are a variety of strategies you can do. And talk a little bit about that. But for this type, this firm has got multiple office locations, and you can see them on this map, and that's permissible. So again, it's just a great way to highlight the different locations and the information about each of those locations at your firm. So in the final example here, you can see not the same kind of experience as we saw with some of the lawyers that are, including images of themselves and client testimonials in that one box, just a different experience for them. Okay, so if you want to get started with Google My Business, the easiest way to do it is just to go to search for Google My Business. You will see it lives at google.com/business. It'll pop up this page. And if you're already on it, this will give you can sign in, and we'll talk about the actual dashboard. If you're not, the first step would be to search for your business in there. So what you don't want to do is create a duplicate listing. So when you click on the add new location button, you'll see it'll prompt you to search for your business name. And so, I'll just use my business as an example. When it finds it, you want to use the existing business. So this might be a little bit confusing, but Google pulls data in from all sorts of sources, offline data, online data, other websites. So even if you've never created a Google My Business listing, Google might have information about your firm already there. And this is important because if you just create a new business and you create a duplicate, that can create problems for you down the road. So it's really important that you start by searching for existing listings of your firm and of you as an individual practitioner before you create a new one. If nothing shows up, then it's fine. You can create a new one and you can go through the process of creating it. But I always like to start that off for people that have never used this before. You'll create more headaches for yourself if you start creating duplicate listings by not checking to see if it already exists. Another thing I just wanted to bring up, because again, this is going to be an hour long, and I can't teach you everything, but I want to make sure that you have some resources here to do some additional learning. Google My Business has really extensive documentation on how to actually use it, problem solving. They also have a really robust community of experts that can walk you through problems, because it's not as intuitive and easy to use as we'd like it to be. And so getting some help from the community, this is a great place to go to get that. The other thing that I want to bring up, and we'll walk through each of these as part of this conversation, are the guidelines for representing your business. So these are basically the Google My Business guidelines. These are the rules. And if you break Google's rules, they can slap you pretty hard. In fact, we've seen listings, hard suspensions, soft suspensions. They don't show up for, listings don't show up for searches on the firm's name. So I'm a very follow the guidelines the best you can. They're not always super clear, and there are some things you can do to work around some of them. The most common example of that is people will say, oh, well, I'm using keywords in my business name. If you do that and it gets reported as spam, it can get filtered. On the other hand, if you actually change your firm name to include keywords, and that's what it's registered with the state, and that's what it's registered with the bar, then that's okay. So for example, if you wanted to be, if it's just talk about me, it's like Gyi's Injury Law Firm, and I'm using injury in the keyword. If that's the actual trade name, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because vary state by state. I'm actually not off the top of my head, can't remember if North Carolina permits trade names, but if they did, then that might be something you can consider. If they don't, then just stick to the actual name of your firm. So let's get into the actual dashboard. So after you actually created your listing, and again, I'm going to use my listing as an example. you get this nice interface. This is the behind the scenes of how you can actually add information to your Google My Business listing. So a couple things. One is the first, we're going to start with the basic info. The basic info is the most important piece because this is going to dictate how Google understands information about your business and where they show your listing. So uh, the business name field, again, use your firm name, or if it's, if it's practitioner listing, just use your name. The next is the category field. Google suggests using as few categories that most accurately represent your business. We've played around with this. I tend to say stick to one primary category. Some issues that happen here are that, say you have a practice that you do personal injury, criminal defense, and bankruptcy and family law. So it's maybe a more general practice firm. And you want to include all those categories in your listing. The challenge becomes when consumers do searches, the category that shows up might not be the category that reflects the search that they did. And so what happens is, someone, say personal injury is like 80% of your practice, and someone does a search for a personal injury lawyer in your location, and then in the local pack box, it'll actually show one of your other categories. And then the consumer is going to say, well, okay, then this doesn't match what I'm searching for. So I try to really stick to a primary category, whatever the most bang for your marketing buck is online, that you practice, use that category, and maybe use, if it's personal injury, maybe also add trial lawyer. But you want it to be the most specific category that is the majority of your practice. And unfortunately, it's Google's world. So I understand. I know lawyers get frustrated because they say, well, I'm 30% of these three practice areas. So what should I do? And my answer usually still is focus on one category for the location. And then maybe you try something different, like a different category for a practitioner page so you can get some coverage on other categories. But the more that you add in here, the more confusion issues that you're likely to run into from category perspective. Okay, next is your address. Just a note here, this should be intuitive, but use your correct business address. Unfortunately, if you're a completely virtual firm, you're not eligible for Google My Business. So, Google is really trying to reflect businesses in Google My Business in the local pack that have physical locations that customers, in our case, clients, actually can come into the location. So if you're in a co-working space like a WeWork or something like that, those tend to be okay. It's hit or miss. If you try to use like a Regus, really hit or miss, whether or not they'll show in the local pack. You can't use a PO box. It's got to be a physical office. And I know a lot of lawyers too will do like the sharing because they want more coverage across the state. Again, that's hit or miss too, because if you say you're sharing a office location with another lawyer, there's some filtering that can go on where your listing just will never show up in the local pack. It will show up for searches on your name, but for those non-brand category searches, it's very difficult to have them show up. Service area, don't add service areas. That's for a different type. That's for if you're actually like a local service business with a service area where you actually go to customers. So think more like a home improvement contractor. That would be a service area. Don't add service area. If you do that, you can run into problems with actually showing up in the packs. Hours of operation, you want that to reflect the times that you're actually able to answer the phone and respond to customers. Google really wants that to be a reflection of the time that you actually have clients come to your office. But we found that you can really go with, as long as someone's answering the phone for verification purposes, you can really open up the hours. And so that's an important one to think about in terms of when clients are likely to call you or potential clients are likely to call you. So, and this is a business decision that every lawyer's got to think about. But if you have 9 to 5 and you are a DUI lawyer or a lawyer that tends to get clients who need their help or potential clients who are going to call them in the evening, those searches, it's going to reflect in the local pack that your office is closed outside of those hours. And so for people that don't know you, new clients, they're going to be less likely to call you during your office being closed, especially for those more urgent types of practice areas where they actually need you. So that's really important to think about. maximizing the hours that you can actually respond to the phone. And then you can do, there's special holiday hours and things like that. Okay, the next thing is your phone number. This is really important. Historically, the local SEO community has been pushing this idea of you have to have consistent name, address, phone. They call it NAP. If you search for this, you'll see people talking about NAP. But that just means name, address, phone, and it's got to be consistent across the web. That's one of the things that consistency Google uses as a factor in how they show your listings. However, recently, maybe in the last year or two, Google has allowed, or at least seemingly allowed, for a tracking number to go into your Google My Business profile. So what I recommend is a primary toll-free tracking number as the main number in your Google My Business listing, and as an alternative number, your actual local phone number. It's important that your actual local phone number is in there because that will help with the consistency. But the real advantage here is if you use a tracking number, especially toll-free, that you can actually see calls that are dedicated to that listing. So if that tracking number only exists in your Google My Business profile, if you use some software like CallRail or some other call tracking, you can actually measure how many calls you're getting specifically from your Google My Business listing. And now you can hold your Google My Business listing accountable for actually generating, new potential client calls. The reason I recommend the toll-free number versus the local number, and there's different viewpoints on this as well, is because some consumers, for most consumers in the primary practice areas like personal injury, bankruptcy, criminal defense, and that kind of stuff, proximity matters a lot. And so proximity of your office to where they're searching matters. And so if they see an area code that seems foreign to them, they're going to be less likely to call. So that's why I say toll free. On the other hand, if you have a area code that matches where they are, that's going to be very compelling to them because it's very local. And so some lawyers will say, oh, I'd rather have the local area code because that's going to attract my local clients. But just keep in mind that for those people that might not share the area code, they're going to be less inclined to call you than they might be if it's a toll-free number. And so it really depends on your geographic location, the area that you want to serve, how area codes are laid out in your area. Okay, next issue is the short name. You can update your short name, make it simple. Don't make it super long. It should reflect your actual business name or your name if it's a practitioner listing. Not a lot of fanciness there. Next is the website. Actually, we've got some questions rolling, and I'm just going to try to jump on real quick here because they're relevant in this context here. So first, yes, there's been, it was confirmed that we can use a trade name, but it has to be submitted to the State Bar for approval. Can we control the outside photo on GMB? My firm's pic has a ridiculous parking lot pic. The answer is you can't control it, but you can certainly influence it by adding more pictures of the attorneys. So my suggestion is, and we'll go through this in the actual photos section, but you can add different sections of photos and you really can influence it a lot there versus just having, if you don't have any pictures, like Google will just pull like a Google map. That's probably why you're seeing the parking lot. For hours, can you do by appointment? So the real issue there is it depends on what the question is. If you're saying that your office is closed except for by appointment, then I would say that's not going to be great for Google My Business. You really want to have the hours, like a steady hours of operation, because otherwise, anytime that you put any time that's closed, it's going to show your office closed during that time period on Google My Business. And so from an acquisition strategy, it's not a great way to do that because you want your offices to show open so people are actually more inclined to call you. Okay, what about using a Google phone number? Google number is a primary number, actual number secondary. So you can use a Google phone number, but it needs to be your local number that you're using everywhere. So back to this idea of NAP consistency. If you use a Google number in one place, but you have a different number on your website and a different number on your Avo listing and a different number somewhere else, that's going to create NAP inconsistency, and it's going to make your Google My Business listing less likely to show up in the local pack. So again, if you're going to use a local, whether it's a Google number or a tracking number or whatever, that local number has to be the number that lives in what they would call the quote unquote local search ecosystem. You want to use that number everywhere. Okay, that covers those questions. Feel free to keep sending them in. Appreciate that. Let's move on to website. So the two fields for website that are currently listed in the dashboard are your website, the actual, it's just the homepage, and then an appointment URL. And so you can either use we use a contact page on our site, but you could also use some kind of scheduling. If you use Calendly or if you use Acuity or something like that, you can use that in the appointment URL. That will show up in the listing. And you'll notice on our listing, we've got these UTM parameters. So this is a little bit kind of a pro tip here. If you add UTM parameters to your listing, it'll show these visits in both your Search Console data. So it's probably a topic for another day, but Search Console basically tracks organic data from Google. So you can see like the queries that people use and the number of times a search was performed and the clicks on that particular URL. But you can also see it in Google Analytics. And so this is, again, one of my big things is attribution and tracking. All this stuff is marketing gobbledygook unless you're actually tracking this back to qualified potential clients who are turning into actual clients. And so adding UTM parameters is a great way to hold your Google My Business listing or your agency or marketing vendor people accountable for actually generating phone calls and potential clients, because you can see in your Search Console and analytics data clicks and conversions in analytics, at least, specifically from your Google My Business listing. So if UTM parameters is new to you, you can go read about those, but I recommend at least trying to add a GMB, a campaign parameter, to both your website and your appointment URL so you can track those. You can also add, when we talk about posts, you can add those to post URLs so you can track the clicks that are specifically generated by Google My Business post URLs through Google My Business listing. Services is a new-ish feature. You can add different services in here. I haven't seen a ton of them popping up. They sometimes will pop up in the local finder in a local pack result. So if you add free consultation or things like that, sometimes you can generate those in the local finder listing. I think it's a clever thing to do, but it's not, I don't think it's imperative at this stage. I think it's likely Google will make that a little bit more robust in the future, but right now, not a huge issue. Highlights, you can call certain things out if you have, again, free consultation. This is really intended for businesses that have more like discount codes or special offers, stuff like that. If you have those at your firm, if you're offering different things besides just consultations, that might be an area to highlight those things. And then the description, you want to try to fill out as best you can in terms of both eloquently positioning yourself as an expert, as well as using keywords in the description field, because those types of things will help Google understand what it is you do. So again, category keywords like the practice area plus lawyer plus location, those are kind of essential to have in there. But you can also add some additional things that are likely to be good descriptors for the types of questions that people have. But really, we'll get into the Q&A section of the Google My Business listing. That's a better place to do that. And then date open, and then photos. Okay, so that's the basic info. That's like the main kind of point of getting your business information correct. And again, make sure that it's consistent. It has to be, the addresses and the phone and the business name have to be the same here as they are on your website and a variety of other places across the web. That's really, really important. Okay. The next big section that we're going to talk about right now is reviews. And so finding ways to motivate happy clients to leave reviews on Google My Business is key, because those are going to show up again on that instance of first impression of searches on your name. You're going to see the reviews populate right in the one box, and they're also going to populate in the local pack. And so after you do the basic information, this is probably the most important thing to focus on. You've got to get to 5 stars. I don't know if this is still true, because Google's been playing around with this, but it used to be that you had to get to at least 5 stars from them to start showing, or 5 reviews to start showing reviews. And so focus on getting happy clients to leave reviews on your website. That's a whole other conversation too, but it should be a priority in terms of searches on your name. People expect to be able to see what it's like to work with you, and that's going to be primarily through clients that you've had experience with, other colleagues. Google has guidelines on what reviews are actually okay. You don't want to get into the swapping thing. I see lawyers that will be like, well, I'll give you a review. If you give me a review, I wouldn't do quid pro quo swapping. But it's okay. In my view of it, it's okay if you have colleagues leave reviews, but you don't want it to just be purely quid pro quo like that. The other thing that I would suggest is if you do seminars or if you teach or if you take leadership positions, those are also ways that people can leave you a review. So, if someone watches your seminar or teaching, maybe you have a prompt in your email signatures that says, hey, did you have a great experience with our firm? Click here to let the world know, stuff like that. That'll help people leave more reviews that aren't necessarily clients to retain. In fact, we have attorneys that have reviews on their Google My Business listing that will say things like, although, this lawyer didn't handle the types of cases that I needed help with, they referred me to a lawyer who did, and I really appreciate that. That's a totally fine review in my view of it. The people that actually work at Google might take slightly different review, but go read the guideline, and it's open to some interpretation there. My view of it is if they have an experience with your firm or have an experience with you that was positive, then that's okay for a review. Okay. Next section, the section is the messaging session. So this is actually, you can prompt a message right from your Google My Business dashboard so that people can contact you. It won't show your phone number. It'll show a prompt for a messaging. It's kind of like a chat through Google My Business. But again, this is a great way to reduce the friction for people that are looking for information about your firm to contact you. You also want to make sure that whatever number this goes to, if it's your cell phone or if it's some other number that's regular, it's got to be regularly monitored, because you don't want people thinking they're able to contact you and then you're not responding to it. That creates all sorts of problems. And you can turn messaging off. If you don't want to receive messages through Google My Business, you can turn it off. But it is a very frictionless way for people to actually just connect with you right from a search on your name immediately. Okay, so those are the big ones that I wanted to cover. There are a couple of, we might as well cover posts real quick. So posts allows you to, basically generate a post in your Google My Business listing. So we do a lot of different things, like the marketing people would call like top of funnel, bottom of funnel tests in your post. So you might do things like community service outreach, advocacy. You can include client testimonials in here, and they'll pop up in your one box. Again, Google tests these things all the time, so the position of them has been moving a lot. But you can add buttons to them. So if you've got pages or posts on your website that you want to highlight, drive people back to your website, this is a great way to do that. You can also add UTM parameters to this, so you can track the actual performance of your Google posts. Really, really popular way to do that. If you do events, or if you have some kind of offer at your firm, these are great ways to highlight these things in your actual one box listing or your Google My Business local pack finder listing. So I encourage you to explore those as well. Okay, I wanted to say a word on this website builder thing. So if you don't have a website, you might consider using Google's website builder. It's built right into Google My Business. There are debates about how Google might give some preference to using their website builder tool. It's very basic. It's not that easy to use, in my opinion. And there's all sorts of other problems. So this should really be like the fallback website builder. I'm a big WordPress person. If you're not using WordPress and you want to just use something simple, I would suggest checking out Squarespace. But if you don't want to use either of those, you can check out the website builder that's built into Google My Business, but it is pretty limited. But it will highlight the basic information, and it integrates directly with Google My Business. So that's nice. Okay, so this is the frequently asked questions section of the Google My Business documentation. I'm not going to cover all of these, but I thought I would just highlight a few of them. One is that Google My Business is free. If I didn't mention that, that's a big one. I know that comes up as like, how much does all this cost, which is really nice. And then the other big one is the eligibility issue. And I'll just reiterate that you have to have a physical office. Google My Business is not intended for online virtual offices. And so if you don't have a physical office, you really can't do anything with Google My Business. And, people will try to get around with a PO box or some kind of temporary virtual office. And PO boxes won't work at all. I've seen it hit or miss with the virtual offices like a Regis, but really your best bet is just find other ways to get visibility for searches on your name besides Google My Business if you are a purely virtual office. And I thought it would be worth mentioning, Google has support for Google My Business. It's not great, but if you're running into problems, if you get a suspension or if there's an edit to your site that you, or to your listing that you don't want, this is an avenue to try to make an update or contact them. So I just wanted to point that out. There is some support. It could be improved, but it's better than none. So I just want to point that out. Okay, so now that we've kind of covered the basics, let's talk about some of the more advanced things for folks that have already claimed their profiles on Google My Business. They kind of get a sense, but they really came here to see, how do I get my business, my listing to show up in the local pack? So this is the most important page from Google's perspective on ranking in the local pack. You just search for improve your local ranking on Google. You'll see it. You can see obviously the URL in the browser here. But there are three major factors that go into how Google shows your business. And I'm going to skip down to these. And they're relevance, distance, and prominence. So relevance is basically matching the search. So when someone's based on their location and the type of search query that they enter, it needs to match. And so how do you impact relevance? Well, it's things like, does your business name match the practice area that they searched on? Do your categories match? Is there information and keywords in the reviews that are left on your Google My Business listing that match the searcher's query, both location as well as topic information? So the more that you can get the relevance factor to match what the searcher's doing, the more likely Google's going to make that connection. And so including keyword information, frequently asked question information, both on your website and in your Google My Business listing where appropriate, that's going to help improve your relevance factor. The second is distance. Distance there's not much you can do about distance unless you're going to open a new office. And so, that's another business decision. But distance is basically Google's calculation of both the intent of the searcher. So that might be if the searcher used a city or state or neighborhood or some kind of location modifier in their query. And how far that is from where your actual office is or where your practitioner page listing address is. It's a calculation that they're doing based on a variety of factors. There's not much you can do about it except for considering where you have your office. And I know lawyers who have moved because they wanted to have an office in a particular area to serve a particular location of clients. And the closer that, the more that you're able to limit that proximity, the more likely it is to show up. And again, I know this is frustrating for a lot of lawyers who say, well, I'm a personal injury lawyer, and for the right case, I would take a client anywhere in my state. And unfortunately, that's just not how Google My Business works. If you're focused on doing that, while there are some things you can do to influence it, you're better off thinking about running ads. Ads, you can have a lot of control of location. Your organic listings, you just don't have that much impact. And in fact, when we talk about, I'm going to show you a tool you can use to actually show an overlay of a map of how well you rank in a particular area. You'll see that it changes. The local packs will change, especially in major markets. Like I'm in Chicago, I'll walk across the street and I'll get a different local pack as I walk downtown. And so there's just not a lot you can do to influence the distance metric, except for the third thing, which is prominence. So the more prominence that you have, you can influence the area in which your listing shows up. So that might be a little bit confusing, but what you're really doing is just saying, hey, we're a really well-known law firm that deserves a lot of visibility. And so Google will show you in a wider geographic area. And so if you've got firms that are kind of dominating the area, it's mostly because of this prominence factor. The biggest prominence factors that are, the traditional SEO type stuff are like links. And so that's a whole conversation for another day, but I wanted to at least touch upon the interplay between traditional notions of SEO and Google My Business, because for competitive practices in competitive locations, the prominence factor is the one that you really need to focus on. That's going to move the dial in terms of showing up for queries that are outside of just your business name. So, if you think about like the practice area plus location plus lawyer type of search, it's going to be this prominence factor that makes the biggest difference in how well you show up in those listings. So a question, Google verifies your address via postcard. Yes, there's a couple different ways that they do verification. And it's really important. Actually, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up because you have to verify your address or you have to verify your listing in order for it to actually start populating. And so, I see lawyers run into problems where they either the address is wrong or they got a suite number wrong or they never get the postcard. And it takes some time to do that. So you want to be aware that you actually have to verify your listing. But I think, I apologize because I haven't done this in a little while, but they also had a phone verification option. So there are two, or at least historically have been two, but the postcard verification is the most common way that happens. Okay, so I wanted to make a point and point out this Local Falcon tool. It's really valuable from a local SEO perspective. I'm just going to log in here to my account, but essentially what happens here is you can run a scan to see a particular visibility for a firm. So in here, you just enter your name, the primary keyword that you want to focus. You can set a radius and a grid size, and it will populate. And so a couple points I want to make here. Number one is if you just search for in your area on your phone for your category query, it's not going to be a reflection of what other people might see. And so the point being that results are really, really personalized now and really localized. And so this tool basically just pulls in from Google's Maps API. So this doesn't include all the personalization aspects that you might get if you're searching on your phone, but it gives you a good sense of your visibility. And so what I really want to point out here is, again, for lawyers that, if this is a search around the San Francisco area, you can see that this firm does really has great visibility in San Francisco, but as you zoom out, it becomes much more difficult to rank without actually opening those offices. And this tool also, if you click into it, you can see the specific other listings that are populating for Google My Business. One thing that I really like to look at in here is this is good for competitor research. So you can actually see what is this firm doing that's causing them to have such great visibility? And then you can look and do all the analysis on their sites and backlink profile and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really helpful way to understand like who's actually the market share leader for Google My Business in your particular area. The other thing I wanted to point out just to demonstrate the value of adding the UTM parameters. So this is Search Console data for our firm. And if you so now I've isolated that these are the impressions and clicks that came through my Google My Business listing and the appointment URL. And so if you filter by this and you just look at these, you can actually also see the queries. And so this becomes really important. The queries is just another term for the search. So obviously you can see people that are searched on by the company name, but then all of these other non-category searches. So the same thing you can do for your firm if you add the UTM parameters. And this becomes very helpful because you can see what types of volume there are for different search queries that are local to you. It might impact if you buy those keywords on AdWords or Google Ads now. It might impact how you create content on your site or optimize your pages. It'll also is a good reflection if you do offline advertising. So if you're doing a lot of TV or billboards, you should see more searches on your name and your firm name showing up in Search Console because again, when people are watching those advertisements, they're sitting there with their phone, and so they're going to start searching on your name and your firm name. So this is a good way to track that kind of brand search through your local pack listing. So that's really important thing to think about. And then the same thing, this is the Google Analytics data. So this is filtered for, because we've tagged it with, we've added the parameter GMB. So this is filtered for campaign GMB, Google Organic. You can actually see the visits that come through from your Google My Business listing in your analytics data. And again, you can, in analytics, if you got goals set up, you can actually track this to phone calls and form fills and live chats. And now you're doing specific source attribution from Google My Business all the way through to your CRM. And now you can do return on ad spend and return on investment calculations specifically for your Google My Business listing, which is really powerful and important in terms of allocating resources of time and money to online marketing in general. But you can also do it for Google My Business. And so I thought it's worth pointing that out. Question. So advice for posting address for law firms that share office space. Yeah, this is a tough one. So I'll just read the whole thing. So law firm shares a historic house with several other firms. Google gets confusing and multiple law firms have the same address. Would you recommend adding suite A or similar delineation, or will that confuse Google more than the suite doesn't really officially exist? This is a tough one. So I've seen it work a variety of ways. If the firms, so let's just kind of lay the land here. They're all in a historic building, multiple firms in a historic building. If those firms are all in the same category, you've got it's going to be very difficult for multiple firms to rank for those category terms in Google. And so I would honestly, in those situations, if Google My Business is going to be a priority for you from your acquisition standpoint, I would consider a different location. I know people hate to hear that, but it's just to get two of the same practices at the same address to show up at the same in the same practice area, the same category, is very, very difficult to do, and it's you're more likely that one is going to appear and the other one's going to get filtered. Now, if they're different practices, they're different categories. So you got, we'll say firm one is personal injury and firm two is criminal defense, and you have different categories in your Google My Business listing, and you have different suite numbers, then yes, I think that you can probably get around that problem. And so creating an artificial suite number at the office, I think is fine. But the bigger issue is the categorization stuff. So if it's the same practice area, it's going to be very difficult. And of course, you don't want to share a phone number, and obviously, you don't want to share a firm name. Um, but the same category, same practice areas in the same location, one of those listings is likely to get filtered. So that's the major issue there. And then the follow-up question is, well, can we focus on a practitioner listing? And the answer is yes, but the problem is like to Google, they don't care about practitioner versus physical office from like they don't distinguish those. They're just listings to Google, and so one is still probably going to become the one that shows, and the other one's going to get filtered whether it's a office listing or a practitioner listing. But what you could do is, if you could go to a co-working space and pay the couple $100 a month for the address, and then use your practitioner listing over there, and that way now you've got separation between the addresses. But the shared office space is a really thorny issue. And I know it's frustrating, but if you've got the same type of practice and you're in the same address, one firm is going to be the winner, and most of the other ones are going to get filtered out. It's not always the case, but most of the time that's what we tend to see. Another thing that I wanted to point out in the actual interface is the insights section, and people get a little bit misled about this. So this is queries. This is Google's Google My Business data. And it's important to recognize that your insights data for Google My Business, your Search Console data, and your Google Analytics data are totally different data sets. And so they're not going to match. And so you'll say, oh, well, I don't understand why I'm getting this traffic over here in Google Analytics and it's different in Search Console and different in Insights. And the answer is that the data is being generated a different way. But they're useful data points to look for directional trends. So what you should hopefully over time you're seeing is that people are showing up both for discovery and direct. Discovery is people that are searching on like the practice area type terms, and direct are people that are searching for your business name. This is not super accurate data, so don't conclude that when you see, oh, this is total 377 views, that's how many times your listing showed up. It's just they don't match apples to apples. The other big one that I want to point out here is the call tracking issue. So keep in mind that when this call you data that's generated by Google My Business typically underreports, and the reason is because the only way that Google can track the call is on a mobile click to call, right? So this data is not tracking if someone's actually looking at your Google My Business listing on a desktop and they call your number from their phone. That will not be reported in here. And so that's why it's so important to use a call tracking number in something like CallRail or call tracking metrics or the millions of other call tracking tools. So you can actually track calls that are to that dedicated number in Google My Business. Don't rely on this as an indicator of how many calls you're getting for your Google My Business message, Google My Business call data. It's just not, it's usually under reporting. And so keep that in mind. Now, messages is a more accurate reflection because the only way that you can actually generate a message through here is to actually click. into the message interface. And so those are actually more accurate. And driving directions requests are also rather accurate. Visits is not that accurate. So again, keep this in mind directionally, but don't use this to be like, oh, I got this many phone calls from my Google My Business listing, because it's just usually not accurate. And then there's some more information in there. Let's go back to the photos section just to bring up a couple points, because one of just some strategic things that we've seen that are good from a photos perspective. So it was brought up earlier, can you influence the actual photos? And so that's going to be under the identity tab. And so they have a logo section and a cover section. Those are your best ways to influence the identity. But I would also add team pictures, pictures at work. You can also add videos here at work. You can add outside pictures. So if you have, like, if your office is a selling point for your practice, that's a good place to do that. It also gives people like geographic landmarks, so they can actually tell if they're trying to find you. Interior pictures. Video is really compelling as well, especially if it's permissible to use. If you have clients that are willing to do video, get their consent, and they're happy to do the video testimonial. Video testimonials in Google My Business are really powerful because, again, that first impression that pops up is a client speaking on your behalf before they even get to your website. That's a really powerful tool. You can have them do, you can actually add 360 videos or 360 renderings of your office. That's a little bit overkill in my opinion, but and then obviously if you have clients that come to you that are posting pictures here, this is not as common for law firms. Most practice people aren't coming to actually share pictures, but if you put a sign up that say, hey, share your picture, that might be something. But again, the big thing here is that all of your ethical obligations apply to Google My Business just like they do in the real world. And so client confidences and all that kind of stuff, you got to think about the systems that you put in place and the prompts you put in place if you're going to have people actually share information through Google My Business, because you don't want them to blow confidences and stuff like that. Okay, that covers the photos section. That's probably one of the most important things, because again, when you go back to the actual listing, the photos is one of the first things that people are going to click on. And so, you can do branding messaging, showing lawyers at work is a good idea. Putting client testimonials in here. So for example, in this firm, they actually load some video, speaking engagements, but also video testimonials. There's a tab for video. And so the lawyer speaking as well as client testimonials in there. That's a very powerful thing to include, to let people know what it's like to work with you, the types of problems that you help with, why you're uniquely qualified to actually address those issues. It puts a face to the practice. A lot for most people that don't have a lot of experience with lawyers, it's scary. It can be a scary thing to even start to engage with a lawyer, and they're dealing with something that's could be very one of the most difficult times in their life. And so personalizing it through that is a really, really powerful thing to do from a marketing standpoint. The final thing here, and then we'll open it up for questions, is the questions and answers section of the Google My Business listing. So you can populate your own questions. So this is a great place to use frequently asked questions, like, especially if it's difficult to find your office and you want to include directions there, or if you want to include, put yourself into consumers or your clients' mindset. What are the types of things that they would ask you that you hear all the time? Put those questions right in there, because if someone asks it, there's likely that other people are going to have that question, and then this reduces that friction. So whether it's driving directions, or if it's free consultation, or what you charge for initial consultation, there are business questions to ask here. I can't make a blanket statement that's going to work for everybody, but the more information that you provide here, the less likely you're going to get calls with those types of questions. So it makes it more efficient for your practice. It also, again, for the consumer, you're making it very easy for them to get the kind of answers they need, which is going to make them more likely to give you a call and consider hiring you if you're answering the types of questions they have in advance. Not a place to give legal advice, but talking about your processes for communication, how you keep clients up to date, the types of practice areas that you actually handle. I mentioned driving directions. Those are great things to do in the Q&A, and you can seed those questions in here and then respond to them. So, for example, if this firm had typed in, they can ask the question and then answer the question, and it will show the answer as the owner, but it anonymizes the actual question aspect. So you can, like I said, seed it with questions that come up a lot. And then, of course, you can encourage people to go there and ask questions, and you can respond to them there as well. So that's the gist of Google My Business. I hope that this was helpful and you learned something new. We do have some time for some questions now. So if there are any other additional questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And of course, you can always follow up with me. I'll try to pull up there it is. So you can, we have tips and email tips and all sorts of stuff on our website. Check out the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing Podcast and the Clienting Podcast if you have additional questions. And of course, you can just send me direct messages on Twitter or anywhere else online. And I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that you found this valuable.